In the shadowed valleys of the Carpathian Mountains, where mist clings to ancient stones like memories refusing to fade, lies the ruins of House Drakmoor, a dynasty that once ruled 3 realms with crowns of silver and hearts of fire. For 800 years, their bloodline has slumbered, scattered to the winds after a betrayal that shattered the very foundations of the werewolf world. But prophecies, like blood, have a way of calling their own home. Seraphina Blackthorn carries a mark she's never understood, a crimson crescent moon that burns against her shoulder blade, pulsing with each full moon like a heartbeat from another life. She believes herself ordinary, orphaned, forgotten. She has no idea that her blood holds the key to awakening the most powerful werewolf dynasty in history, or that Kale Nightwood, the enigmatic alpha who haunts her dreams, is bound by ancient oaths to either crown her or destroy her. When the old magic stirs and the moon calls to forgotten queens, love becomes both salvation and curse. For some legacies sleep for centuries, waiting for the right heart to awaken them and the right soul to either restore them to glory or bury them forever in blood and shadow. Chapter 1. The Mark of Forgotten Queens. The antique shop on 7th Street smelled of dust, secrets, and something else. Something that made Seraphina Blackthorn's mark burn like a brand against her skin. She pressed her palm to her shoulder blade through her thin sweater, trying to ease the throbbing that had plagued her for 3 days straight. Ever since she'd found the ornate silver mirror hidden in her late aunt's attic, the crescent-shaped birthmark had been restless, pulsing with an inner heat that defied explanation. The mirror itself sat wrapped in silk on the passenger seat of her car outside, too precious and too dangerous to leave unattended. She didn't understand why she felt that way about it, only that looking into its depths had awakened something in her blood, something that whispered of moonlight and ancient power. "You're back," said Mrs. Chun, the elderly shop owner, looking up from her ledger with knowing eyes that seemed far too ancient for her weathered face. "The mirror called to you, didn't it?" Seraphina's breath caught. She hadn't told anyone about finding the mirror, hadn't even mentioned her intention to research its origins. The mark on her back flared hotter, and she caught the scent of something wild on the air, pine forests and mountain snow, the musk of wolves running free beneath starlight. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Some things recognize their own blood, child." Mrs. Chin set down her pen and studied Seraphina with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your Aunt Clara brought that mirror to me 40 years ago, begging me to keep it safe. Said it belonged to your family, but that the time wasn't right, that you weren't ready." The old woman's words sent a chill down Seraphina's spine. Aunt Clara had never spoken of family beyond themselves, had raised her as an orphan with no history, no legacy. Every time Seraphina had asked about her parents, about where she came from, Clara had grown distant and changed the subject. "Ready for what?" Seraphina's voice came out as barely a whisper. Mrs. Chun disappeared into the back room, her footsteps echoing in the cluttered space. When she returned, she carried an ancient leather-bound tome, its cover worn smooth by countless hands and its pages yellowed with age. The very sight of it made Seraphina's birthmark pulse with recognition, as if her blood itself remembered this book. "House Drakmoor," Mrs. Chin said, opening the tome carefully to reveal intricate drawings of werewolf dynasties, family trees illustrated in silver ink, and crests that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. The Lost Crown Dynasty. They ruled the Northern Territories for 600 years, commanding the loyalty of 17 packs across 3 kingdoms. Seraphina leaned closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. The family crest at the top of the page showed a crimson crescent moon surrounded by silver wolves, their eyes burning with ruby fire. It was identical to the mark that burned against her skin, down to the smallest detail. "What happened to them?" she breathed. Mrs. Chen's finger hovered over a section of the page that had been deliberately torn away, leaving only jagged edges and faded ink stains. Betrayal. The kind that shatters bloodlines and scatters heirs to the winds. 800 years ago, House Drakmoor fell in a single night of blood and shadow. Their castle was burned, their pack slaughtered, their crown lost to the mists of time. The shop bell chimed with a sound like distant thunder, and every instinct Seraphina didn't know she possessed screamed danger. She spun toward the entrance, her newly awakened senses picking up the scent of leather and steel, of winter wind, and something indefinably wild. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that gleamed like obsidian in the afternoon light. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the air itself seem to thicken and pulse. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Silver. Not gray or blue, but true silver, like moonlight on still water, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. In the shadowed valleys of the Carpathian Mountains, where mist clings to ancient stones like memories refusing to fade, lies the ruins of House Drakmoor, a dynasty that once ruled 3 realms with crowns of silver and hearts of fire. For 800 years, their bloodline has slumbered, scattered to the winds after a betrayal that shattered the very foundations of the werewolf world. But prophecies, like blood, have a way of calling their own home. Seraphina Blackthorn carries a mark she's never understood, a crimson crescent moon that burns against her shoulder blade, pulsing with each full moon like a heartbeat from another life. She believes herself ordinary, orphaned, forgotten. She has no idea that her blood holds the key to awakening the most powerful werewolf dynasty in history, or that Cale Nightwood, the enigmatic alpha who haunts her dreams, is bound by ancient oaths to either crown her or destroy her. When the old magic stirs and the moon calls to forgotten queens, love becomes both salvation and curse. For some legacies sleep for centuries, waiting for the right heart to awaken them and the right soul to either restore them to glory or bury them forever in blood and shadow. Chapter 1. The Mark of Forgotten Queens. The antique shop on 7th Street smelled of dust, secrets, and something else. Something that made Seraphina Blackthorn's mark burn like a brand against her skin. She pressed her palm to her shoulder blade through her thin sweater, trying to ease the throbbing that had plagued her for 3 days straight. Ever since she'd found the ornate silver mirror hidden in her late aunt's attic, the crescent-shaped birthmark had been restless, pulsing with an inner heat that defied explanation. The mirror itself sat wrapped in silk on the passenger seat of her car outside, too precious and too dangerous to leave unattended. She didn't understand why she felt that way about it, only that looking into its depths had awakened something in her blood, something that whispered of moonlight and ancient power. "You're back," said Mrs. Chun, the elderly shop owner, looking up from her ledger with knowing eyes that seemed far too ancient for her weathered face. "The mirror called to you, didn't it?" Seraphina's breath caught. She hadn't told anyone about finding the mirror, hadn't even mentioned her intention to research its origins. The mark on her back flared hotter, and she caught the scent of something wild on the air, pine forests and mountain snow, the musk of wolves running free beneath starlight. "How did you know?" she whispered. "Some things recognize their own blood, child." Mrs. Chin set down her pen and studied Seraphina with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Your Aunt Clara brought that mirror to me 40 years ago, begging me to keep it safe. Said it belonged to your family, but that the time wasn't right, that you weren't ready." The old woman's words sent a chill down Seraphina's spine. Aunt Clara had never spoken of family beyond themselves, had raised her as an orphan with no history, no legacy. Every time Seraphina had asked about her parents, about where she came from, Clara had grown distant and changed the subject. "Ready for what?" Seraphina's voice came out as barely a whisper. Mrs. Chun disappeared into the back room, her footsteps echoing in the cluttered space. When she returned, she carried an ancient leather-bound tome, its cover worn smooth by countless hands and its pages yellowed with age. The very sight of it made Seraphina's birthmark pulse with recognition, as if her blood itself remembered this book. "House Drakmoor," Mrs. Chin said, opening the tome carefully to reveal intricate drawings of werewolf dynasties, family trees illustrated in silver ink, and crests that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. The Lost Crown Dynasty. They ruled the Northern Territories for 600 years, commanding the loyalty of 17 packs across 3 kingdoms. Seraphina leaned closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. The family crest at the top of the page showed a crimson crescent moon surrounded by silver wolves, their eyes burning with ruby fire. It was identical to the mark that burned against her skin, down to the smallest detail. "What happened to them?" she breathed. Mrs. Chen's finger hovered over a section of the page that had been deliberately torn away, leaving only jagged edges and faded ink stains. Betrayal. The kind that shatters bloodlines and scatters heirs to the winds. 800 years ago, House Drakmoor fell in a single night of blood and shadow. Their castle was burned, their pack slaughtered, their crown lost to the mists of time. The shop bell chimed with a sound like distant thunder, and every instinct Seraphina didn't know she possessed screamed danger. She spun toward the entrance, her newly awakened senses picking up the scent of leather and steel, of winter wind, and something indefinably wild. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that gleamed like obsidian in the afternoon light. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, making the air itself seem to thicken and pulse. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Silver. Not gray or blue, but true silver, like moonlight on still water, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Seraphina. He spoke her name like a prayer and a curse combined, stepping into the shop with the predatory grace of a born predator. The air around him shimmered with barely contained energy, and she caught the scent of his wolf. Ancient, powerful, dangerous. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Who are you?" she managed, though part of her already knew. He was the man from her dreams, the shadow who had haunted her sleep for months with eyes like starlight and a voice that called to something deep in her soul. In her dreams, he had been her protector and her destroyer, her salvation and her doom. "I am Cale Nightwood, Alpha of the Northern Pack, last guardian of the ancient bloodlines." His gaze never left hers as he spoke, silver eyes burning with an emotion too complex to name. "And I have been bound by blood oath and sacred duty to protect you since the moment you drew your first breath. But that protection comes with a price that may damn us both." Mrs. Chen closed the tome with a sharp snap that echoed through the shop like a gunshot. The awakening has begun. The mark burns, the dreams have started, and the old magic stirs in her veins. There's no stopping what comes next. Seraphina's birthmark flared with sudden, searing heat that drove her to her knees. Images flooded her mind in a torrent of silver and shadow, stone castles wreathed in mountain mist, wolves running beneath a blood-red moon, great halls filled with the howls of the faithful. She saw herself, but not herself, a woman with her face standing on a throne carved from midnight stone, wearing a crown that pulsed with crimson fire. Power flowed through the vision woman's veins like liquid starlight, and 17 packs knelt before her throne in willing submission. "What's happening to me?" she gasped, her hands pressed against the wooden floor as waves of ancestral memory crashed over her. Cale was beside her in an instant, his hands steady on her shoulders, his touch sending electricity racing through her veins. The moment their skin connected, the visions crystallized, becoming sharper, more real. She could smell the pine forests of the Northern Territories, hear the distant howl of her pack calling her home. "Your bloodline is awakening, Seraphina. You are the last daughter of House Drakmoor, heir to a throne that has stood empty for 8 centuries. His voice was rough with emotion, silver eyes flickering with pain and something deeper, longing mixed with fear. "The mirror was your grandmother's, passed down through the female line for 1,000 years. It holds the memories of every queen who came before you." She looked up at him, seeing past the careful mask he wore to the man beneath, a guardian torn between duty and desire, bound by oaths that demanded he both protect and potentially destroy the woman he was falling in love with. "And you," she whispered. "What are you to me, really?" His jaw clenched, and for a moment she saw the war raging in his silver eyes. "I am sworn to help you claim your birthright and restore House Drakmoor to its former glory. But the prophecy that binds us speaks of choice. Your ascension could bring peace to the werewolf world, or it could plunge us into darkness deeper than the fall of your ancestors." The mark on her back pulsed once more, and somewhere in the distance, Carried on a wind that tasted of snow and ancient magic, Seraphina heard the lonely howl of wolves calling their lost queen home. She was no longer just Seraphina Blackthorn, orphan librarian with a strange birthmark. She was the last daughter of Drakmoor, and her awakening would either save or damn them all. Chapter 2. The Guardian's Burden. Kale's penthouse overlooked the city from the 40th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view that should have been breathtaking. Instead, Seraphina found herself staring at her reflection in the darkened glass, watching the way her mark glowed faintly through her sweater like a captured star. The silver mirror from her aunt's attic sat on the marble coffee table behind her, its ornate surface seeming to pulse with its own inner light. She had agreed to come with him. What choice did she have when her world had just been turned upside down? But every instinct screamed that she was walking into something far bigger and more dangerous than she could comprehend. The Drakmoor bloodline carries the gift of moonsight, Kale said from behind her, his voice carefully controlled. She could feel him watching her, sense the tension radiating from his powerful frame like heat from a forge. Visions of the past, glimpses of possible futures, the ability to see through the eyes of your ancestors. It's why your dreams have been so vivid lately. Seraphina turned to face him, noting how he kept his distance, as if touching her again might break some invisible barrier he'd built around himself. The memory of his hands on her shoulders still burned through her skin, leaving her craving more contact even as her rational mind warned her to be careful. How do you know about my dreams? Because I've been having them too. The admission seemed torn from him against his will, silver eyes flickering with something that looked like anguish. The bond between a guardian and their charge runs deeper than mere duty, Seraphina. When your power began to stir 3 months ago, mine responded. When you dream of the old castles, I see them through your eyes. When you feel the call of your ancestors, it echoes in my blood. He moved to the windows, pressing one palm against the glass as he stared out at the city lights below. In the reflection, she could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched with some internal struggle. The Nightwood Pack has served as guardians to House Drakmoor for over 1,000 years, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. My ancestors swore blood oaths to protect your bloodline, to preserve the ancient ways, to ensure that when the time came for House Drakmoor to rise again, there would be wolves ready to stand at their side. But, she prompted, sensing there was more to this story, something that explained the pain she heard in his voice. Kale's laugh was bitter, sharp-edged. But the oath comes with a price. If the last daughter proves unworthy, if her power threatens to consume rather than restore, if she chooses the path of shadow over light. He turned to face her, silver eyes burning with anguish. Then, it is the guardian's duty to end the bloodline forever. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. You're saying you might have to kill me. I'm saying the magic that binds us gives me no choice if you fall to darkness. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Do you think I wanted this burden? Do you think I chose to be bound to a woman I'm falling in love with, knowing I might have to destroy her with my own hands? The raw confession hung in the air between them, like a living thing. Seraphina's mark flared with sudden heat, responding to the intensity of his emotions, the depth of his conflict. She could feel his wolf calling to something wild in her own blood, a recognition that went beyond mere attraction to something primal and eternal. You're falling in love with me? She whispered. He closed his eyes, his powerful frame trembling with the force of his restraint. From the moment your power first stirred and called to mine across the distance between us. From the first shared dream where I saw you standing in the ruins of Drakmoor Castle, silver light pouring from your skin like starfire. I've been fighting it for months, telling myself it was just the bond, just the magic connecting our bloodlines. Seraphina crossed the space between them, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't resist. When she placed her hand over his heart, his eyes snapped open, silver depths blazing with want and fear in equal measure. What if I told you I've been falling too? She said softly. What if I told you that in my dreams, you're not just my protector, but my mate, my other half, the one soul in all the world who truly sees me?" His hand covered hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his chest where his heart hammered like a war drum. "Then I would tell you that fate has a cruel sense of humor, binding us together with love only to threaten us with duty." The mirror on the coffee table began to glow more brightly, its silver surface rippling like disturbed water. Images formed in its depths, a great castle built into a mountainside, its towers reaching toward the stars like fingers of white stone. Wolves ran through moonlit forests, their howls echoing off ancient cliffs. And in the castle's great hall, a woman who looked exactly like Seraphina sat on a throne of black marble, a crown of silver and rubies on her head, her eyes glowing with inner fire. "Your grandmother," Cale breathed, following her gaze to the mirror. "Queen Heir Drakmoor, last ruler of the Northern Territories. She held the crown for 60 years, brought peace to 17 packs, and was betrayed by the one person she trusted above all others." "Who betrayed her?" Seraphina asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. "Her guardian, her mate, the man who swore to protect her with his life." Cale's voice was barely above a whisper, weighted with the grief of centuries. "Cassius Nightwood, my great-great-grandfather." The revelation hit her like a thunderbolt. The reason for his anguish, his fear, suddenly became clear. History was repeating itself, a Drakmoor heir and a Nightwood guardian, bound by love and duty, standing at the crossroads where both could lead to salvation or destruction. "Why?" she gasped. "Why did he betray her?" "Because her power was growing too strong, threatening to consume not just her, but everything she touched." The moon sight showed her visions of conquest, of expanding the werewolf territories into human lands, of war that would expose our kind to the world. Cassius believed he was saving both races by ending her reign. In the mirror, the image shifted, showing the great hall filled with silver flames, werewolves fighting werewolves, Queen Lyralii falling with a blade in her heart while her guardian stood over her, tears streaming down his face. "But the prophecy speaks of a choice," Cale continued, his silver eyes never leaving hers. "The last daughter will face the same crossroads as her grandmother, but this time, love might triumph over duty. This time, the guardian and his charge might find a way to break the cycle." Seraphina's mark pulsed with sudden warmth, and she felt something shift deep in her chest, a door opening, power unfurling like wings. For a moment, silver light danced along her skin, and she felt the weight of a crown she had never worn, heard the howls of packs she had never led. "I can feel them," she whispered. "The wolves. They're calling to me from the Northern Territories, waiting for their queen to come home." Cale's hand tightened over hers, his wolf recognizing the awakening power in her voice. "Then we have to go north, back to Drakmoor Castle. But Seraphina, others will be watching, waiting. There are those who want to see House Drakmoor restored, and those who would kill you to prevent it. The journey ahead will test everything we are, everything we might become." She looked into his silver eyes and saw her future reflected there, a path fraught with danger and shadowed by the ghosts of the past, but illuminated by the possibility of love conquering the darkness that had claimed her bloodline for 8 centuries. "Then we face it together," she said, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. Guardian and queen, bound by fate but choosing each other freely. The mark on her back flared one final time, and somewhere in the distance, carried on a wind that smelled of pine and snow, the wolves of the Northern Territories howled their welcome to the heir who was finally coming home. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Ancient Pact. The black SUV cut through the mountain roads like a blade through silk, its headlights carving twin paths through the pre-dawn darkness. Seraphina pressed her face to the window, watching the landscape change from city sprawl to dense forest, feeling something deep in her chest respond to the wild call of the mountains. Her mark had been restless since they'd left the city 3 hours ago, pulsing with an energy that seemed to grow stronger with each mile north. "We're entering the old territories now," Cale said from the driver's seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. "Can you feel it?" She could. The air itself seemed different here, thicker, charged with an ancient magic that made her skin tingle and her wolf instincts sharpen to a razor's edge. Even though she'd never shifted, never even known she was more than human until yesterday, something primal in her blood recognized this place as home. "The trees," she whispered, pressing her palm against the glass. "They're singing." Kale's silver eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, understanding flickering in their depths. The Whispering Pines. They were planted by the first Drakmoor queen 1,000 years ago, bound with blood magic to remember every secret spoken in their shadow. Your ancestors used them as a warning system. The trees would carry news across the territories faster than any messenger. As if responding to his words, the ancient pines seemed to lean closer to the road, their needles rustling with a sound like distant voices. Seraphina caught fragments of what sounded like whispers in a language she didn't recognize, but somehow understood. The lost daughter returns. The blood remembers. The crown waits. "They know I'm here," she breathed. "Everything in these mountains knows you're here. The question is whether they'll welcome you or try to stop you." Kale's jaw tightened as he navigated a sharp turn, the SUV's headlights sweeping across a weathered stone marker carved with symbols that made Seraphina's mark burn with recognition. "We're not the only ones who felt your awakening, Seraphina. There are others. Other bloodlines with their own claims to power, other wolves who remember the old grudges." As if summoned by his words, howls echoed through the forest around them. Not the wild cries of ordinary wolves, but the deeper, more complex songs of their shapeshifter cousins. Some sounded welcoming, eager, but others carried notes of challenge, of warning. "How many packs are out there?" she asked, her newly awakened senses trying to parse the different voices calling through the darkness. 17 packs once knelt to House Drakmoor," Kale replied, his eyes constantly scanning the treeline. "When your grandmother fell, they scattered. Some went into hiding, some joined other houses, some—" He paused, his expression darkening. "Some turned to darker paths, embracing the shadow magic that your bloodline once fought to contain." The SUV rounded another curve, and suddenly the forest opened up to reveal a valley bathed in silver moonlight. In the distance, perched on a rocky outcropping like a crown jewel, stood the ruins of Drakmoor Castle. Even in decay, it was magnificent, towers reaching toward the stars, walls that had once withstood 1,000 battles, windows that glowed faintly with residual magic. Seraphina's breath caught in her throat. This was the castle from her dreams, the seat of her ancestors, the place where queens had ruled and loved and died for 1,000 years.
But it was also more than that.
As she stared at the ancient stones, memories that weren't her own flickered through her mind. Great halls filled with laughter and music, council chambers where the fate of the werewolf world had been decided, bedchambers where royal heirs had been conceived under the blessing of the moon. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And dangerous," Kale added grimly. "The castle has been abandoned for 8 centuries, but it's not empty. The old magic lingers, and with it, the guardian spirits of your ancestors. They'll test you, Seraphina. They'll want to know if you're worthy to claim what was taken from your bloodline." The SUV began its descent into the valley, winding through switchbacks that had been carved into the mountainside by werewolf claws centuries ago. As they drew closer to the castle, Seraphina could make out more details. The great bridge that spanned a chasm deeper than night, the outer walls that still bore scorch marks from the final battle, the tower where a light burned in the highest window despite the castle's supposed abandonment. "Someone's here," she said, pointing to the light. Kale's silver eyes followed her gesture, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. "That's the Queen's Tower. No one has been able to enter that chamber since your grandmother's death. The magic that seals it should only respond to true Drakmoor blood." As they crossed the ancient bridge, the stones beneath the SUV's tires began to glow with a soft silver radiance. The light spread outward like ripples on a pond, racing along the bridge's length and up the castle walls, illuminating carved wolves that seemed to turn their heads to watch the approaching vehicle. "The castle recognizes you," Kale breathed, wonder and worry warring in his voice. "The awakening stones haven't lit for 800 years." They pulled into the courtyard, and Seraphina stepped out of the SUV on trembling legs. The moment her feet touched the ancient cobblestones, power surged through her like lightning, silver light pouring from her mark to dance along her skin. The very air around her shimmered with magic, and she heard the whispers of 1,000 queens welcoming their heir home. But beneath the welcome, she sensed something else, a darkness that lurked in the castle's depths, a shadow that had been waiting centuries for someone worthy of its attention. "Kale," she whispered, reaching for his hand as he joined her in the courtyard. "Something's wrong. There's something here that doesn't want me to succeed." Before he could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows of the great hall's entrance. It was a woman, tall and regal, with silver hair that gleamed like starlight and eyes that held the wisdom of ages. But there was something translucent about her, something that spoke of death and lingering sorrow. "Grandmother?" Seraphina gasped. The spirit of Queen Heir Drakmoor smiled, but it was a sad expression, weighted with 8 centuries of grief. "My dear child,
You have come home at last.
but I must warn you, the castle remembers not just love and glory, but betrayal and blood. Before you can claim your birthright, you must face the shadows of the past and choose whether to repeat our mistakes or forge a new path." The ghostly queen's gaze shifted to Kale, and her expression hardened. "And you, Knightwood heir, you carry your ancestors' burden, his guilt, his fear. Will you be the guardian who saves the dynasty, or the one who ends it forever?" As if in response to her words, the shadows in the castle's depths stirred, and a howl of rage and hunger echoed from the dungeon far below. Something dark and ancient had been awakened by Seraphina's return, something that had been feeding on the castle's pain for 8 centuries. Chapter 4. The Weight of Ancient Crowns. The great hall of Drakmoor Castle stretched before them like a cathedral of memory and shadow. Moonlight streamed through the broken stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscope patterns across the stone floor where weeds had grown through the cracks. But as Seraphina stepped across the threshold, the hall shimmered and transformed. Dust vanished, tapestries unfurled along the walls, and phantom torches blazed to life, revealing the chamber as it had been in its glory days. "The castle shows you what it remembers," Queen Heir's spirit explained, gliding beside them with ethereal grace. "Every celebration, every council meeting, every moment of triumph and tragedy, all of it lives within these stones." Seraphina walked deeper into the hall, her mark pulsing with each step. Around her, ghostly figures began to materialize, previous queens of House Drakmoor, their guardian protectors, pack leaders who had knelt in fealty before the throne. She could hear their voices like whispers on the wind, fragments of conversations that had shaped the destiny of the werewolf world. "So many," she breathed, overwhelmed by the weight of their expectations. 47 queens ruled from this hall over the course of a millennium, Heir said, her voice heavy with pride and sorrow. Each one faced trials that tested not just her power, but her wisdom, her compassion, her strength of will. "You are the 48th Seraphina, and perhaps the most important of us all." Kale moved to her side, his silver eyes scanning the ghostly assembly with wariness. She could feel his tension, sense his wolf responding to the ancient magic that permeated every stone. "What kind of trials?" he asked. The ghostly queen's smile was enigmatic. "The same trials every Drakmoor heir has faced since the first queen claimed her crown. The trial of blood, to prove her lineage. The trial of spirit, to test her resolve. And the trial of shadow, to determine whether she will choose light or darkness when power calls to her soul." As if summoned by her words, 3 doorways opened in the walls around them, one carved with silver wolves, one wreathed in spectral flames, and one that seemed to absorb light itself, its depths darker than midnight. "But first," Heir continued, turning to face Seraphina directly, "you must know the truth about what happened here 8 centuries ago. You must understand why your bloodline fell and what it will take to restore it." The air in the great hall shimmered, and suddenly they were no longer alone. The ghostly forms of werewolves filled the space, pack leaders and their mates, court officials, guards in silver armor. And at the center of it all, two figures that made Seraphina's heart clench with recognition. Queen Lyralii as she had been in life, young, beautiful, radiating power like a living star. And beside her, a man with silver eyes and dark hair, his features so similar to Kale's that they could have been twins. Cassius, Kale whispered, his voice thick with shame and inherited guilt. The ghostly scene began to play out before them, like a memory given form. Seraphina watched her grandmother rule with wisdom and strength, saw the love that blazed between queen and guardian, witnessed the golden age that House Drakmoor had ushered in under Lyralii's reign. But she also saw the shadows gathering. The queen's power growing stronger with each passing year, her wolf form shifting from silver to something darker, more primal. She saw the visions that plagued Lyralii's dreams, werewolves ruling over humans, the old territories expanding across continents, a world where their kind no longer hid in the shadows. The moonsight gift comes with a price, the real Lyralii explained as they watched her younger self pace the throne room, silver light crackling around her like lightning. The more power we wield, the more we see of what could be. And sometimes, those visions become obsessions. In the ghostly scene, Cassius knelt before his queen, tears streaming down his face as he pledged his eternal love and service. But Seraphina could see the fear in his eyes, the way he flinched when Lyralii's power flared beyond her control. She wanted to unite all the packs under Drakmoor rule, the queen's spirit continued. Not just the 17 who served willingly, but every werewolf in existence. She believed that only through unity could our kind survive the coming changes in the world. But her methods. The scene shifted to show armies of werewolves marching through human cities, their howls echoing off concrete and steel. Humans fleeing in terror as creatures they thought were myths stepped out of legend to claim dominion over the earth. I saw a future where we no longer lived in hiding, the ghostly Lyralii whispered, her form flickering with remembered anguish. Where our children could shift freely under the open sky, where we ruled as the apex predators we were born to be. But I became so focused on that vision that I lost sight of the cost, the innocent lives that would be lost, the chaos that would consume both our peoples. The final scene played out with brutal clarity. Cassius standing over his queen's body in the throne room, the silver blade in his hand dripping with her blood. The other werewolves in the hall torn between loyalty to their fallen queen and horror at what she had almost unleashed. And in the background, the dark presence that had been whispering in Lyralii's ear, feeding her visions of conquest and glory. The Shadow Court, Seraphina gasped, recognizing the writhing darkness that had influenced her grandmother's final days. They were here even then. They have been here since the first Drakmoor claimed the throne, Lyralii confirmed. A council of ancient spirits who feed on power and ambition, who whisper promises of greatness while leading their chosen toward destruction. They corrupted me, as they corrupted others before me, and as they will try to corrupt you. The ghostly scenes faded, leaving them alone in the restored Great Hall. But now Seraphina could see the throne at the far end of the chamber, carved from black marble and silver, its high back crowned with crescents of ruby and moonstone. Empty for 8 centuries, waiting for an heir worthy to claim it. The trials will test whether you can resist their influence, Lyralii said, her voice growing fainter as dawn approached. Whether you can wield the power of our bloodline without being consumed by it. And whether the love between you and your guardian is strong enough to break the cycle of betrayal that has haunted House Drakmoor for generations. Kale stepped closer to Seraphina, his hand finding hers. Whatever the trials demand, we face them together. No, the ghostly queen said firmly. The trials must be faced alone. It is the only way to prove that your strength comes from within, not from external bonds. But know this. The choices you make in those chambers will determine not just your own fate, but the destiny of every werewolf alive today. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the stained glass windows, Queen Lyralii's spirit began to fade. Choose wisely, my dear granddaughter. Choose with your heart, but also with your mind. And remember, Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in claiming power, but in knowing when to let it go. With those words, she vanished, leaving Seraphina and Kale alone before the 3 trial doorways. The castle held its breath around them, ancient magic crackling in the air as it waited to see whether the last daughter of Drakmoor would rise to claim her birthright or fall to the same shadows that had consumed her grandmother. The weight of 1,000 years of history pressed down on Seraphina's shoulders, but when she looked into Kale's silver eyes, she found the strength to take the first step toward her destiny. Chapter 5. The Trial of Blood. The doorway carved with silver wolves beckoned to Seraphina like a siren's call, its ancient runes pulsing with the same rhythm as her heartbeat. She stood before it, feeling the weight of Kale's gaze on her back, knowing that once she crossed the threshold, she would face whatever lay beyond alone. "The trial of blood comes first," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "To prove my lineage, my connection to the dynasty." Kale's hand brushed her shoulder, a touch so light it might have been imagined, but she felt the warmth of it spread through her like liquid fire. "Your blood is true, Seraphina. I can smell the power in your veins, see it in the way the castle responds to your presence. Whatever waits beyond that door, remember, you belong here." She turned to face him, memorizing every detail of his features, the strong line of his jaw, the silver eyes that seemed to hold starlight, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. If she failed these trials, if the darkness claimed her as it had claimed her grandmother, this might be the last time she saw him as herself. "If something goes wrong," she began, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. "Nothing will go wrong," he said firmly. "You're stronger than you know, braver than you believe. And when you emerge from these trials, you'll be the queen this world needs." The conviction in his voice gave her courage. She pressed her palm against the carved doorway, feeling the stone warm beneath her touch. The wolves etched into the surface began to move, their silver forms flowing like liquid mercury as they rearranged themselves into a pattern she recognized, the Drakmoor family crest. The door swung open silently, revealing a corridor that stretched into darkness. But as Seraphina stepped across the threshold, torches blazed to life along the walls, illuminating a passage carved from living rock. The air hummed with ancient magic, and she could smell the scent of her ancestors, pine forests and moonlight, power and pride. The corridor led to a circular chamber dominated by a pool of still water that reflected the stars despite being deep underground. Around the pool's edge stood 12 pedestals, each holding a crystal vial filled with liquid that gleamed like liquid mercury in the torchlight. "The blood of queens," a voice whispered from nowhere and everywhere at once. 47 rulers who came before you, their essence preserved for this moment. To prove your lineage, you must drink from each vial and withstand the memories they contain. But beware, not all who have attempted this trial have emerged with their sanity intact. Seraphina approached the first pedestal, her mark burning with recognition. The vial contained blood from the first Drakmoor queen, Morwen the Wise, who had united the northern packs 1,000 years ago. As Seraphina lifted the crystal container, she could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on her. She tilted the vial to her lips and drank. The world exploded into sensation and memory. Suddenly, she was Morwen, standing on a battlefield where werewolves fought in their hybrid forms, their claws and fangs gleaming in the moonlight. She felt the queen's determination as she called for peace, her wisdom as she negotiated truces between warring packs, her strength as she forged the first alliances that would become the foundation of the Drakmoor dynasty. But she also felt Morwen's loneliness, the weight of crown and responsibility, the sacrifices made in the name of the greater good. When the vision ended, Seraphina staggered, her head spinning with memories that weren't her own. 11 more vials waited. She moved to the second pedestal, where Queen Evelina the Bold had left her essence. This time, the memories were of conquest and expansion, of diplomatic missions to distant lands, of the delicate balance between showing strength and maintaining peace. Seraphina felt the queen's courage as she faced down challenges to her rule, her compassion as she protected the weak, her determination to leave a better world for future generations. With each vial, the memories grew more intense. Queen Selene the Mystic, who had mastered the Moonsight gift and used it to prevent a war that would have devastated the werewolf world. Queen Isadora the Just, who had established the laws that still governed pack relations centuries later. Queen Valentina the Fierce, who had defended the realm against an invasion of rogues bent on destroying the ancient ways. By the time Seraphina reached the 7th vial, her knees were shaking. The accumulated weight of 47 lifetimes pressed against her consciousness, threatening to drown her own identity in the flood of ancestral memory. But she pressed on, driven by a determination that came from both her own will and the strength of every queen who had come before her. The memories weren't all glory and triumph. She experienced Queen Miranda's grief when her mate was killed in battle, felt Queen Cordelia's anguish when her own son betrayed the crown for power, lived through Queen Anastasia's final moments as plague ravaged the kingdom she had fought so hard to protect. When she lifted the 47th vial, her grandmother's blood, Seraphina was barely standing. But Lyreliai's memories were the most vivid of all, perhaps because they were closest to her own time, or perhaps because the bond of direct lineage made them more powerful. She saw her grandmother's coronation, felt the joy and hope that had filled the young queen's heart as she accepted the crown. She experienced the golden years of Lyreliai's reign, the prosperity and peace that had flourished under her rule. But she also felt the slow corruption that had crept in like poison, the whispers of the shadow court that had gradually turned noble ambition into dangerous obsession. The final memory was the most painful, Lyreliai's last moments, the silver blade piercing her heart as she looked up into the face of the man she loved. But there was no anger in that final gaze, only sorrow and understanding. Even as she died, the queen forgave her guardian for the choice he had made. Seraphina collapsed beside the pool, gasping for breath as 47 lifetimes of memory settled into her consciousness like sediment in still water. But she was still herself. Stronger now, wiser, carrying the accumulated wisdom of a dynasty, but fundamentally unchanged. "You have proven your blood," the voice whispered, and the pool's surface began to glow with silver light. "You carry the memories of your ancestors within you now, their strength and their wisdom. But memories are not enough to claim a crown. True rulership requires understanding not just who you are, but who you choose to be." In the pool's surface, an image formed, Kale standing in the great hall, his silver eyes fixed on the doorway through which she had vanished. She could see the worry etched in his features, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides as he waited for her return. "He loves you," the voice observed, as Cassius loved Lyreliai. But love can be both salvation and destruction. The question that will define your reign is whether you can accept that love without being weakened by it, whether you can rule as both queen and woman without losing yourself to either role. Seraphina pulled herself to her feet, feeling the new weight of ancestral memories settling into her bones. She was no longer just the last daughter of Drakmoor. She was the heir to 47 queens, the keeper of their wisdom and their mistakes. "I understand," she said, her voice carrying new authority. "I accept the memories, the responsibility, the burden of the crown. But I also choose to forge my own path, to learn from their triumphs and their failures without being bound by them." The chamber filled with silver light, and when it faded, a doorway had opened in the opposite wall. Beyond it lay the corridor that would lead her back to the great hall, back to Kale, back to the next trial that awaited. But as she walked toward the exit, Seraphina carried with her the strength of 1,000 years of queens, their voices a whispered chorus in her mind, their love and wisdom a crown more precious than any made of gold and jewels. The trial of blood was complete. 2 more trials awaited, each one more dangerous than the last. Chapter 6. The Trial of Spirit. Seraphina emerged from the trial of blood to find Kale pacing the great hall like a caged wolf, his silver eyes blazing with worry and barely contained energy. The moment he saw her, relief flooded his features, but it was quickly replaced by awe as he took in the changes the trial had wrought. She moved differently now, with the fluid grace of a born ruler, her spine straight with the weight of inherited authority. Silver light danced beneath her skin like captured starlight, and when she looked at him, he saw depths in her green eyes that spoke of wisdom far beyond her years. "You carry them with you now," he said softly, recognizing the shift in her presence. "All of them." 47 queens, she confirmed, her voice richer, more layered than before. "Their memories, their strength, their mistakes. I can feel them like a chorus in my mind, offering guidance and warning in equal measure." Kale reached for her, then hesitated, suddenly uncertain of his place in the presence of this transformed woman who was both the Seraphina he loved and something infinitely more complex. She saw his hesitation and closed the distance between them herself, taking his hands in hers. "I'm still me, Kale. Changed, yes, but still the woman who fell in love with a guardian sworn to protect her. The memories don't diminish what we have. They help me understand how precious it is." Relief flooded through him, and he pulled her close, breathing in her scent, now layered with the wild magic of her awakened bloodline, but still fundamentally her. "What did you see in there?" "Everything," she whispered against his chest. "The glory and the tragedy, the triumphs and the failures. I understand now why my grandmother fell to the shadow. Power without wisdom, ambition without compassion, it's a poison that corrupts from within." Before he could respond, the second doorway, the one wreathed in spectral flames, flared brighter, its carved surface depicting scenes of battle and sacrifice. The trial of spirit was calling to her. "This one will be harder," she said, studying the flickering doorway. "The trial of blood tested my lineage, but this will test my resolve, my willingness to make the hard choices that come with a crown." "What kind of choices?" Kale asked, though something in his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. "The kind that separate queens from ordinary women," she replied, the wisdom of her ancestors whispering through her voice. "The choice between personal happiness and the greater good, between love and duty, between mercy and justice." She turned to face the flaming doorway, but Kale caught her arm. "Seraphina, whatever they show you in there, whatever they ask you to choose, remember that you don't have to repeat the past. You can forge a new path." She smiled, pressing a kiss to his palm before gently removing his hand from her arm. "That's what I intend to do. But first, I have to prove I'm strong enough to bear the weight of that choice." The spectral flames parted as she approached, revealing a corridor that seemed to be carved from living fire. The walls pulsed with orange and gold light, and the air shimmered with heat that didn't burn but instead filled her with energy, with purpose. The corridor led to a vast chamber dominated by 3 thrones arranged in a triangle. Each throne was occupied by a figure that made Seraphina's breath catch in recognition. 3 of her most famous ancestors, queens whose reigns had defined the very essence of Drakmoor rule. Queen Morwen the Wise sat on the first throne, her silver hair braided with moonstone, and her eyes holding the accumulated wisdom of ages. Queen Isadora the Just occupied the second, her bearing regal and stern, a crown of black iron on her brow. And on the third throne sat Queen Lyralii herself, not as the ghost who had greeted them in the courtyard, but as she had been at the height of her power, beautiful, terrible, and crackling with barely contained energy. "Welcome, child of our blood," Morwen said, her voice echoing with the authority of the first queen. "You have proven your lineage, but now you must prove your spirit. Are you prepared to face the choices that will define your reign?" "I am," Seraphina said, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Then let us begin," Isadora declared, and the chamber around them shimmered and changed. Suddenly Seraphina stood in a war camp, surrounded by werewolves in battle gear. The air reeked of blood and smoke, and in the distance she could hear the howls of the wounded and dying. A general approached her, one of her own pack leaders, his face grim with terrible news. "Your Majesty," he said, kneeling before her. "The Eastern Territories have fallen to the Shadow Court's influence. 3 packs have turned rogue, and they're marching on the human city of Millbrook. If we don't stop them, they'll slaughter thousands of innocents and expose our kind to the world. What are my options?" Seraphina heard herself ask, though she knew this was somehow both vision and test. "We can intercept them before they reach the city," the general replied. "But it will mean war against our own kind. Brothers fighting brothers, families torn apart. Many will die on both sides. And the alternative? We could evacuate Millbrook, claim there was a gas leak, or some other disaster. The humans would flee, and the rogue packs would find only empty buildings. But the Shadow Court would see it as weakness, and other packs might be tempted to follow the rogue's example." Seraphina felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her. Save innocent human lives at the cost of werewolf blood, or preserve her people by sacrificing those they were meant to protect. Choose. Queen Isadora commanded from her throne, which had somehow appeared beside the war camp. A queen must be willing to make the hard decisions, even when every option leads to suffering. The memories of her ancestors whispered conflicting advice. Some urged mercy, others demanded strength. But in the end, the choice had to be hers alone. "We intercept the rogue packs," she decided. "I won't sacrifice innocent lives to preserve my own people's secrecy. If we must fight our own kind to protect those who cannot protect themselves, then that is the burden we bear as the apex predators of this world." The vision shattered, and she found herself back in the chamber with the three queens. Morwen nodded approvingly, but Lyreliai's expression was unreadable. "A choice your grandmother might have made differently in her final days," Lyreliai observed. "She would have seen the humans as acceptable losses in service of the greater werewolf good. But your path leads to a different destination." The chamber shifted again, and this time Seraphina stood in a throne room filled with pack leaders from across the territories. But the atmosphere was tense, hostile. She could smell the fear and anger radiating from the assembled wolves. "The Northern Territories demand your answer, Your Majesty," one of the pack leaders snarled, his eyes flashing with barely contained rage. "The humans encroach further into our lands each year. Their cities sprawl into our forests, their roads cut through our sacred grounds. How long will you ask us to hide while they destroy everything our ancestors held dear?" Another leader stepped forward, his voice equally heated. "Our young cannot shift freely for fear of human eyes. Our cubs grow up in cages of their own making, denied their birthright. The old ways are dying, and with them, our very essence as werewolves." "What would you have me do?" Seraphina asked, though she could already sense where this conversation was leading. "Reveal ourselves," the first leader demanded. "Show the humans what we are, claim our rightful place as the dominant species. They fear us in their myths and legends. Let them learn to fear us in reality. And if they fight back?" Seraphina challenged. "If they use their technology, their weapons, their numbers against us? Then we fight," another voice called out. "Better to die as wolves than live as shadows." The throne room erupted in howls of agreement, the pack leaders' eyes blazing with the fire of revolution. But Seraphina felt the weight of her ancestors' wisdom, the memory of civilizations that had risen and fallen, of the delicate balance that had kept both species alive for millennia. "Choose," Queen Morwen commanded. "Will you lead your people into the light, regardless of the cost? Or will you preserve the shadows that have kept them safe for generations?" This choice was even harder than the first. Seraphina could feel the pain of her people, their frustration, and longing for freedom. But she could also see the catastrophic war that would result from revelation, the millions who would die on both sides. "We remain hidden," she decided, her voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. "But we change how we hide. We infiltrate human society, become their doctors, their lawyers, their leaders. We protect them from the shadows while protecting ourselves from their fear. Evolution, not revolution." The vision dissolved, leaving her alone with the three queens. But now their expressions had changed. Morwen looked proud, Isadora appeared thoughtful, and Lyreliai seemed almost sad. "Two choices made with wisdom and restraint," Lyreliai said softly. "But there is one more test, child. The hardest of all. For this one will strike at your heart, not just your mind." The chamber shifted one final time, and Seraphina gasped. She stood in the great hall of Drakmoor Castle, but it was as she had never seen it, broken, burning, filled with the sounds of battle. Werewolves fought desperately against shadowy creatures that seemed to absorb light itself, and at the center of the chaos stood Kale. But this wasn't the Kale she knew. This version of her guardian was older, his face marked by grief and terrible knowledge. In his hand, he held a silver blade stained with blood, and his silver eyes were filled with anguish as he looked at her. "The Shadow Court has corrupted you," he said, his voice breaking. "The power has consumed you, just as it consumed your grandmother. You've become the very thing you swore to fight against." Seraphina looked down at her hands and saw them wreathed in darkness, her veins pulsing with shadow instead of silver light. She could feel the corruption in her blood, the whispers of the Shadow Court promising unlimited power in exchange for her soul. "Kale," she whispered, fighting against the darkness that threatened to drown her consciousness. "Help me." "I can't save you," he replied, tears streaming down his face. "The only way to stop what you've become is to end it, just as my ancestor ended your grandmother's reign of terror. Choose," all three queens commanded in unison. "Will you cling to power and damn your people to darkness? Or will you make the ultimate sacrifice for the greater good?" Seraphina felt the weight of the choice crushing her spirit. To live and condemn the world to shadow, or to die and save it from her own corruption. But as she looked into Kale's anguished eyes, she found her answer. "If I have become the monster," she said, kneeling before him and bowing her head, "then end it. The dynasty matters more than any single queen. The people matter more than my life." The vision shattered like glass, and she found herself back in the chamber, gasping and shaking. The three queens watched her with expressions of profound approval. "The trial of spirit is complete," Morwen declared. "You have shown wisdom over impulse, restraint over aggression, sacrifice over selfishness. You have the spirit of a true queen. But remember," Lyralia added, her form beginning to fade as the trial ended, "the choices you made here were in vision only. When you face them in reality, the weight will be far greater, the consequences far more real. Hold fast to the wisdom you have shown here." A doorway opened, leading back to the great hall where Kale waited. But as Seraphina walked toward it, she carried with her the knowledge that the hardest trial still lay ahead, the trial of shadow, where she would face the very darkness that had corrupted her bloodline for generations. Only one test remained between her and the crown. But it would be the test that determined whether she became the queen her people needed, or the monster they feared. Chapter 7. The Trial of Shadow. Seraphina emerged from the trial of spirit to find the great hall transformed. The ghostly restoration had faded, leaving the chamber in its true state, broken, scarred by 8 centuries of abandonment, but somehow more honest in its decay. Kale stood before the throne, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with tension that spoke of barely contained emotion. "How long was I gone?" she asked, noting the way the light streaming through the windows had shifted from silver moonbeams to the pale gold of early dawn. 3 hours, he replied without turning around. 3 hours of watching that doorway and wondering if you would emerge as yourself or as something else entirely. She could hear the fear in his voice, the echo of ancestral guilt that whispered he might be forced to repeat his great-great-grandfather's terrible choice. Moving to his side, she placed her hand over his heart, feeling the rapid rhythm beneath her palm. "I'm still me," she said softly. "Changed, yes. Tested, definitely. But still the woman who fell in love with her guardian despite knowing the dangers that bond could bring." He turned then, silver eyes searching her face for any sign of the corruption that had claimed her grandmother. What he found there must have reassured him, because the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "What did they show you?" he asked. "Choices," she replied simply. "The kind that define a reign, that separate true rulers from those who merely wear crowns. And in every scenario, the hardest path was also the right one." The third doorway, the one that absorbed light itself, pulsed with darkness, so complete it seemed to devour hope. Just looking at it made Seraphina's mark burn with warning, her newly awakened instincts screaming danger. "The trial of shadow," she whispered, and even speaking the words seemed to make the darkness hungrier, more aware. "This is the trial that broke your grandmother," Kale said, his voice rough with concern. "The Shadow Court doesn't just test your resolve. They try to claim you, to add your power to their own." Lyralii went into that chamber as a queen and emerged as something else. Then why didn't they stop her? Why did they let her face the trial if they knew the danger? Kale's expression darkened. Because refusing the trial means forfeiting your claim to the throne. The magic of the dynasty requires that each heir face all 3 tests. It's supposed to ensure that only the worthy can rule, but sometimes. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Sometimes it destroys them instead, Seraphina completed. She understood now why so few Drakmoor heirs had lived to claim their birthright, why the bloodline had grown thin over the centuries. The trials weren't just tests, they were weapons wielded by forces that wanted to see the dynasty fail. "I have to go in," she said, though every fiber of her being recoiled from the hungry darkness of that doorway. "The crown isn't just a symbol, Kale. It's a responsibility, a burden that I've inherited whether I want it or not. If I don't face this trial, if I don't prove I can resist the Shadow Court's influence, then I'll never be strong enough to protect our people from them. And if you don't come back?" The question was torn from him, raw with 8 centuries of inherited guilt and fresh with his own terror of losing her. She turned to face him fully, memorizing every detail of his beloved features, the strong line of his jaw, the silver eyes that held depths like starlit pools, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he was worried. "Then you'll know I wasn't worthy of the throne," she said simply. "And you'll have to find another way to protect the Pax from what's coming." "There is no other way," he said fiercely. "You're the last daughter, Seraphina. If you fall, the Drakmoor line dies with you, and the Shadow Court will be free to corrupt every pack in existence." "Then I won't fall." She spoke with a conviction that came from the depths of her soul, from the accumulated strength of 47 queens who whispered encouragement in her mind. "I've seen what they're capable of, felt their influence in my grandmother's memories. But I've also learned from her mistakes. I know the price of power without wisdom, ambition without restraint." She moved toward the dark doorway, but Kale caught her hand, pulling her back against his chest. For a moment, they stood frozen in time, 2 souls balanced on the knife's edge between love and duty, between hope and despair. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Whatever happens in there, whatever they show you or promise you, remember that. Remember us." "Always," she breathed, then pulled away before her resolve could weaken. The dark doorway didn't part like the others had. Instead, it seemed to swallow her whole, pulling her into a void so complete that she couldn't tell if her eyes were open or closed. The sensation was like drowning in liquid midnight, every breath bringing darkness into her lungs instead of air. When the void finally released her, she found herself standing in a version of the throne room that had never existed, perfect, pristine, carved from black marble and silver that gleamed like captured starlight. The throne sat empty before her, its surface reflecting depths that spoke of power beyond imagining. "Welcome, last daughter." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, silky and seductive, promising everything she had ever wanted and things she didn't know she craved. Shapes moved in the shadows around the throne room, tall, elegant figures wreathed in darkness, their faces beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "We are the Shadow Court," the voice continued, and now she could see its source, a figure more beautiful than any earthly being, with eyes like black stars and a smile that promised secrets older than time itself. "We have waited 800 years for your return, 800 years for another Drakmoor heir worthy of our gifts." "You corrupted my grandmother," Seraphina said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You turned her into a tyrant, drove her to the very madness that destroyed her." "We offered her power," the figure corrected, moving closer with fluid grace. "We showed her visions of what could be, whispered possibilities in her ear. But every choice she made was her own. We merely expanded her options." Around the throne room, the shadows shifted and swirled, forming images that made Seraphina's breath catch. She saw herself on the throne, but transformed, her eyes blazing with dark fire, her skin crackling with shadow lightning. 17 Pax knelt before her, not in willing fealty, but in terrified submission. And beyond the castle walls, she saw a world transformed, werewolves ruling openly over humans, their kind no longer hiding in the shadows, but casting them over everything they touched. "This could be yours," the Shadow Court whispered. "No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than you are. You could rule not just the werewolf world, but both worlds. Human and wolf alike would bow before the might of House Drakmoor." The vision was seductive, intoxicating. Seraphina could feel the power calling to her, promising an end to all the struggles and sacrifices that leadership demanded. No more hard choices, no more balancing competing needs, just pure, absolute authority. "And the cost?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "What cost?" the figure asked innocently. "You would have everything you've ever wanted: power, respect, the ability to protect those you love without compromise or a limitation." But Seraphina remembered her grandmother's memories, recalled the slow corruption that had eaten away at Lyraliai's soul like acid. She saw through the Shadow Court's lies to the truth beneath. They didn't offer power without cost. They simply hid the price until it was too late to refuse payment. "The cost is my soul," she said firmly. "The cost is becoming the very monster I've sworn to fight against." You don't grant power, you poison it, twist it until it consumes everything good in the wielder. The Shadow Court's collective laughter was like silk dragged across broken glass. Such wisdom from one so young. "But tell us, last daughter, what good is goodness if it lacks the strength to protect what you love?" The throne room dissolved around her, replaced by a scene of devastation that made her heart clench with horror. The castle burned, its walls breached by creatures of living darkness. In the courtyard, she saw Kale fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, his silver blade flashing as he tried to protect a group of young werewolves, cubs who couldn't shift yet, innocents who depended on their elders for protection. "This is what your refusal brings," the Shadow Court hissed. "Without our power, you are too weak to defend what matters most. Watch as everyone you love dies because you chose principle over pragmatism." In the vision, Kale fell beneath the claws of shadow beasts, his silver eyes finding hers across the burning courtyard even as his life bled away. The cubs he had died trying to protect scattered in terror, only to be hunted down one by one. "Stop," Seraphina gasped, her hands pressed against her chest as if she could hold her breaking heart together through will alone. "We can," the figure said, suddenly beside her, its beautiful face filled with false compassion. "Accept our gift, and this future becomes impossible. You will have the strength to protect everyone, to save your mate, to ensure that no innocent ever suffers again." The temptation was overwhelming. To have the power to guarantee safety for everyone she loved, to never again face the terrible choices that leadership demanded, it was everything she wanted and everything she feared. But then she heard them, the whispered voices of her ancestors, 47 queens who had faced their own moments of temptation and either risen above them or fallen to them. Queen Morwen's voice rang clearest of all. "True strength comes not from the absence of struggle, but from choosing to struggle for the right reasons." "No," Seraphina said, her voice gaining power with each word. "I won't trade my soul for false security. I won't become a tyrant to prevent tyranny." The Shadow Court's beautiful faces twisted with rage, their forms becoming less human and more monstrous. "Then you doom everyone you claim to love. Without our power, you are nothing, a weak little girl playing at being queen." "Maybe," Seraphina admitted, silver light beginning to pour from her mark as her true power awakened. "But I'd rather be a weak queen who fights for what's right than a strong one who rules through fear. My ancestors' strength lives in my blood, their wisdom guides my choices, and their love shields me from your corruption." The Shadow Court shrieked as her silver light expanded, driving back the darkness that had filled the false throne room. "You think you've won? This trial never ends, last daughter. We will whisper in your ear for the rest of your reign, tempt you with every hard choice you face. And someday, when the weight of leadership becomes too much to bear, you will come to us willingly." "Perhaps," Seraphina said, her power blazing like a star as she faced down creatures older than civilization itself. "But today is not that day. Today, I choose to be worthy of the crown I've inherited, worthy of the people I serve, worthy of the man who loves me despite the danger that love brings." The false throne room shattered like spun glass, and suddenly she was standing in the real chamber, morning light streaming through the windows to illuminate the ancient throne that waited for her. But she was no longer alone. Kale stood beside the throne, his silver eyes blazing with pride and relief. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You faced them down and came back to us." "We did it," she corrected, moving into his arms with a sense of coming home. "Your love gave me the strength to resist their lies, to remember who I really am beneath all the power and responsibility." As if summoned by her words, Queen Lyreliai's spirit materialized beside the throne, but now she appeared as she had been before the corruption took hold, beautiful, wise, at peace with herself and her choices. "The trials are complete," the ghostly queen announced. "You have proven your blood, your spirit, and your resistance to shadow. The crown of House Drakmoor is yours by right, Seraphina. But more than that, you have proven yourself worthy to wear it." The ancient throne began to glow with silver light, and Seraphina felt the call of destiny in her bones. But as she approached the seat of her ancestors, she wasn't walking toward power. She was walking toward responsibility, toward the hardest job in the werewolf world, toward a future that would test every lesson she had learned. But she wouldn't face it alone. Kale would be beside her, as would the wisdom of her ancestors and the strength of her people. The last daughter of Drakmoor was ready to become a queen. Chapter 8. The Crown of Starlight. The throne of House Drakmoor had waited 800 years for its rightful occupant, and as Seraphina approached the ancient seat of power, the very stones of the castle seemed to sigh with relief. Silver light emanated from the black marble, responding to her presence like a flower turning toward the sun. But it wasn't just the throne that recognized her. The entire castle was awakening, its dormant magic stirring to life after centuries of slumber. "Can you feel it?" Kale asked, his voice filled with wonder as tapestries unfurled along the walls and phantom torches blazed to life throughout the hall. "Everything," Seraphina breathed. The castle's consciousness touched hers like a warm embrace, sharing memories of glory days and celebration, of councils that had shaped the werewolf world and alliances that had lasted for centuries. But beneath the joy, she sensed something else, a deep, abiding loneliness that had permeated the stones since her grandmother's death. Queen Lyreliai's spirit watched from beside the throne, her expression peaceful but urgent. "The awakening will be felt across all the territories," she warned. "Those who have waited for your return will rejoice, but others will see your ascension as a threat to the power they've claimed in our absence." As if summoned by her words, a low rumble echoed through the mountains, not thunder, but the sound of dozens of werewolves in their hybrid forms, their voices raised in a howl that carried both welcome and challenge. The 17 packs that had once served House Drakmoor were responding to the call of their awakened queen, but so were others, rogues and shadow-touched wolves who had grown powerful in the dynasty's absence. "They're coming," Kale said, his hand moving instinctively to the silver blade at his side. "All of them. This coronation won't be the peaceful ceremony your ancestors enjoyed." Seraphina placed her hand on the throne's armrest, and immediately visions flooded her mind. Images of the castle under siege, of battles fought in the great hall itself, of her predecessors defending their right to rule against those who would tear down the old ways. But she also saw moments of triumph, of enemies becoming allies, of the power of the crown to unite rather than divide. "Then we'll face them together," she said, her voice carrying the authority of 47 queens. "But first, I need to understand exactly what I'm claiming." The ghostly queen smiled, pride shining in her ethereal features. "The crown of starlight has been the symbol of Drakmoor rule for 1,000 years. But it's more than mere jewelry. It's a conduit, a focus for the bloodline's power that amplifies the queen's abilities and connects her to every werewolf who swears fealty to the throne. Where is it? Seraphina asked, noting that the throne room held no visible crown or regalia. Hidden, Lyralii replied. Secreted away in the moments before my death, protected by magic that would only respond to the true heir. Place your hand on the throne's back, where the moonstone is set, and speak the words of binding. Seraphina moved behind the throne, finding an enormous moonstone set into its high back. The gem was the size of her palm, its surface carved with intricate runes that seemed to shift and dance in the silver light. When she placed her hand against it, the stone warmed beneath her touch, recognizing her blood. What words? She asked. The first words spoken by the first queen, Lyralii said softly. I claim this crown not for my own glory, but in service to those who would call me queen. I accept this burden not for the power it grants, but for the protection it allows me to offer. Let all who hear these words know that House Drakmoor rises not to conquer, but to guard. Seraphina spoke the ancient oath, feeling the weight of 1,000 years settle on her shoulders. The moonstone blazed with sudden brilliance, and a hidden compartment opened in the throne's base, revealing a crown that took her breath away. It was forged from silver so pure it seemed to glow with its own inner light, its band inscribed with runes that told the story of every queen who had worn it. 7 points rose from the band like stylized wolf ears, each one topped with a star-shaped ruby that pulsed with the rhythm of her heartbeat. But it was the central stone that truly marked it as a relic of power, a crescent-shaped moonstone that seemed to hold the light of every full moon that had ever blessed the werewolf world. The crown of starlight, Kale breathed, awe thick in his voice. I've seen it in the ancient texts, but I never imagined that it would be so beautiful. Seraphina finished, lifting the crown with reverent hands. The moment her fingers touched the silver, power coursed through her. Not the dark temptation of the Shadow Court, but the clean, bright strength of her bloodline awakened to its full potential. No, he said softly. I never imagined it would suit you so perfectly. Before she could place the crown on her head, the great doors of the hall burst open with a crash that echoed through the castle like thunder. A massive werewolf in hybrid form stood silhouetted in the doorway, 8 feet of muscle and fury, his eyes blazing with amber fire, and his muzzle pulled back to reveal fangs like ivory daggers. So, the creature snarled, his voice a bass rumble that made the stones themselves vibrate. The lost princess finally comes home to play queen. More figures crowded behind him, werewolves in various stages of transformation, their eyes reflecting the light like predators caught in torchlight. But these weren't the loyal packs she had expected. These wolves carried the scent of shadow magic, their forms twisted by dark power into something more monster than werewolf. Fenris Blackmane, Kale growled, stepping between Seraphina and the intruders. I should have known you'd be the first to challenge her claim. The massive werewolf laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Challenge? No, Nightwood whelp. I'm here to collect what's mine. 800 years I've waited for a Drakmoor heir weak enough to overthrow, young enough to break. The crown belongs to those strong enough to claim it, not those born to it. The crown chooses its bearer, Seraphina said, her voice calm despite the danger radiating from the intruders. She could feel their hunger, their desire for the power that pulsed in her hands, but she could also sense something else. Fear. They were afraid of what she might become if she truly claimed her inheritance. Pretty words from a pretty girl, Fenris sneered. But words won't save you when my pack tears out your throat. You're untested, untrained, unworthy of the power you think to claim. Then test me, Seraphina said simply, and placed the crown of starlight on her head. The transformation was instantaneous and overwhelming. Power exploded through her like liquid lightning, silver light pouring from her skin to illuminate every corner of the great hall. The crown's moonstones blazed like captured stars, and suddenly she could feel everything, every werewolf in the territories, every pack bond, every oath of loyalty that had ever been sworn to House Drakmoor. But more than that, she could feel the Shadow Court's corruption in Fenris and his followers, the dark power that had twisted them into mockeries of what werewolves were meant to be. They reeked of it, carried it like a disease that threatened to spread to every pack they encountered. "You want to test me?" she asked, rising from the throne with the fluid grace of a born predator. Silver fire danced along her skin, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of every queen who had come before her. "Then let's see how your shadow magic fares against the light of 1,000 years." Fenris charged with a roar that shook the rafters, his massive form moving with surprising speed. But Seraphina was no longer just a woman with royal blood. She was the crown queen of House Drakmoor, wielder of ancient power, heir to a legacy that predated the Shadow Court itself. She didn't dodge his attack. Instead, she met it head-on, silver light erupting from her hands to clash with his shadow-enhanced claws. The collision sent shockwaves through the hall, cracking ancient stones and shattering windows, but when the dust settled, it was Fenris who had been thrown back, his corrupt form smoking where her power had touched him. "Impossible," he gasped, struggling to his feet. "No Drakmoor has wielded that much power since my grandmother fell to darkness?" Seraphina finished, advancing on him with deadly purpose. "The difference between her and me, Fenris, is that I've learned from her mistakes. I know the price of power unchecked, the danger of strength without wisdom. But I also know the necessity of both when facing those who would threaten the innocent." The other shadow-touched werewolves backed away as she approached, their corrupted forms no match for the purifying light that blazed around her like a second skin. But Fenris stood his ground, desperation giving him a courage that bordered on madness. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think putting on a pretty crown makes you a queen? The Shadow Court has been planning for centuries, gathering power, converting packs to their cause. This is just the beginning." "Then let it begin," Seraphina said, her voice ringing with absolute conviction. "Let them come with all their power, all their corruption, all their twisted dreams of conquest. They will find that House Drakmoor has returned, and with it, the strength to stand against the darkness, no matter how long the night may last." She raised her hand, silver light gathering around her fingers like captured starfire. But instead of striking down her enemy, she did something that shocked everyone in the hall. She offered healing instead of destruction. "I offer you a choice, Fenris Blackmane," she said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "Renounce the shadow that corrupts your soul, swear fealty to the true crown, and find redemption in service to something greater than your own ambition. Or continue down the path of darkness and face the consequences of that choice." For a moment, something almost human flickered in Fenris's amber eyes, a memory of what he had been before the Shadow Court's whispers had led him astray. But then the darkness reasserted itself, and he curled his lips in a final snarl of defiance. "I choose strength over weakness, princess. Power over mercy." "Then you choose poorly," Seraphina said sadly, and let the silver light flow from her hands to engulf him completely. When the radiance faded, Fenris was gone. Not destroyed, but transformed. The shadow corruption burned away to reveal the broken werewolf beneath. He lay unconscious on the hall's floor, his form returned to its natural state, the twisted hunger that had driven him replaced by peaceful sleep. "You could have killed him," Kale observed, moving to her side as the remaining intruders fled rather than face her mercy-tempered justice. "Killing him would have made me no better than those who corrupted him," Seraphina replied, the crown's weight now familiar on her brow. "The Shadow Court wants us to become monsters to fight monsters. But that's not what queens do. Queens heal. Queens protect. Queens show a better way even when the easier path beckons." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching wolves echoed through the mountains, but these howls carried joy instead of challenge, loyalty instead of threat. The true packs were coming, drawn by the awakening of their rightful queen. Seraphina stood before her ancient throne, crown blazing with starlight, ready to face whatever came next. The trials were complete, the crown was claimed, but her real work was just beginning. House Drakmoor had risen from 8 centuries of shadow, and with it, the hope that the werewolf world had been waiting for. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The first pack to arrive came not as conquerors, but as pilgrims, their wolves padding silently across the castle's ancient bridge in the silver light of dawn. Seraphina watched from the great hall's restored windows as they approached, 17 werewolves in their natural forms, their fur ranging from midnight black to winter white, their eyes bright with hope and desperate loyalty. The Moonhaven pack, Kale identified, his voice filled with wonder. They've maintained the old traditions for 8 centuries, waiting for this moment. Their alpha, Magnus Silverclaw, is descended from one of your grandmother's most trusted advisors. As the wolves reached the courtyard, they shifted to human form in perfect synchronization, a ritual display of respect that made Seraphina's newly awakened royal instincts respond with approval. The man who stepped forward was tall and broad-shouldered, his silver hair marking him as an elder despite the vigor in his movements. When he knelt in the ancient cobblestones, the rest of his pack followed suit. "Your Majesty," Magnus called out, his voice carrying clearly through the mountain air. "House Moonhaven has kept faith through 8 centuries of darkness. We offer our lives, our loyalty, and our strength to the rightful queen of House Drakmoor." The formal words of fealty sent power thrumming through the crown's moonstones, and Seraphina felt the first pack bond snap into place, a connection that linked her to every member of Magnus' family, allowing her to sense their locations, their emotional states, their needs. It was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. "Rise, Magnus Silverclaw," she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of ancient bloodlines. "Your loyalty is accepted, your faith honored. But know that the crown you serve comes with new burdens. We face enemies that would corrupt the very essence of what it means to be werewolf." Before Magnus could respond, the sound of more arrivals echoed across the valley. But these weren't the respectful approaches of loyal packs. Heavy vehicles roared up the mountain road, military-grade SUVs and armored trucks that spoke of wealth, organization, and hostile intent. "The consortium," Kale growled, his hand moving to his weapon as the vehicles disgorged their passengers in the courtyard below. Shadow-touched packs that have spent centuries building power in the human world. They control banks, corporations, government officials. They've been waiting for a Drakmoor heir to eliminate. The leader who emerged from the lead vehicle was a woman of striking beauty and obvious wealth, her designer clothing unable to disguise the predatory grace in her movements. When she looked up at the castle's windows, her eyes flashed with the telltale silver of advanced corruption, not the clean silver of natural werewolf lineage, but the tainted gleam of shadow magic. "Victoria Ashford," Magnus spat, his peaceful demeanor vanishing as he recognized the newcomer. "She's turned half the eastern packs to the Shadow Court's influence, promising them power and wealth in exchange for their souls." Victoria's voice carried clearly across the courtyard, amplified by unnatural means. "Seraphina Blackthorn, you who call yourself queen, I am Victoria Ashford, speaker for the new order. I come to offer you terms of surrender." "Surrender?" Seraphina called back, stepping onto the great hall's balcony where she could be clearly seen. The crown of starlight blazed in the morning sunlight, and she saw Victoria's followers flinch back from its radiance. "I've just claimed my throne, and already you seek to strip me of it?" "Your throne is a relic of a dead age," Victoria replied, though Seraphina could sense the fear beneath her confident words. "The world has changed in 800 years. Werewolves no longer need to hide in mountain castles, bowing to the whims of so-called royalty. We have evolved beyond the need for queens and kings." "Into what?" Seraphina asked, genuine curiosity coloring her voice. "Into shadow-touched puppets who serve masters darker than any earthly throne?" Victoria's beautiful mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the corruption that had eaten away at her soul. "We serve progress. We serve the future. Join us willingly, and you can keep your pretty crown as a ceremonial bauble. Refuse, and we'll drag you from that throne and scatter your ashes to the 4 winds." The threat hung in the air like a challenge, but before Seraphina could respond, Another voice cut through the tension, young, fierce, and crackling with barely contained power. Like hell you will. A new figure emerged from the forest surrounding the castle, a young woman who couldn't have been more than 20, her red hair blazing like fire in the morning light. But it was her scent that made Seraphina's breath catch. Wild magic, untamed power, and beneath it all, the faint but unmistakable trace of Drakmoor blood. "Who is she?" Kale whispered, but Seraphina was already moving, instinct driving her down the castle steps and into the courtyard. The young woman's eyes met hers across the space between them, and Seraphina saw her own green gaze reflected back. Not identical, but clearly related. The girl's aura blazed with silver fire that had no taint of shadow, and when she smiled, it was with the fierce joy of family recognizing family. "Cousin," the newcomer said, her voice rich with amusement and challenge. "I was wondering when you'd finally come home. I'm Lioness Stormheart, daughter of your great aunt Celeste, the one who escaped the castle's fall and lived in exile in the Pacific Northwest." "You're not alone," Seraphina observed, sensing the presence of others hidden in the forest around them. Lionel's grin widened. "The Stormheart pack has been waiting for this day almost as long as the Moonhaven pack. But we've been preparing for war instead of ceremony." She gestured, and werewolves emerged from concealment, 30 strong, all of them radiating the kind of power that came from centuries of combat training. Victoria's confidence wavered as she found herself outnumbered, but her followers were already spreading out, preparing for battle. 2 packs against the combined might of the consortium? You're brave, I'll give you that. Brave and foolish. 3 packs, Magnus corrected, his own wolves moving to flank the consortium forces. And we fight for something more than power or profit. We fight for the rightful order of our world. The tension in the courtyard ratcheted higher as both sides prepared for violence, but Seraphina raised her hand, silver light pouring from the crown to capture everyone's attention. "Enough," she commanded, her voice carrying across the battlefield to be, with absolute authority. "I will not see werewolf blood spilled in the shadow of my ancestors' home." "Victoria Ashford, you speak of evolution of progress. But what I see before me is devolution, creatures so corrupted by shadow magic that they've forgotten what it means to be wolf, what it means to be pack." She stepped forward, and with each stride, her power became more visible, silver flames dancing along her skin, the very air around her shimmering with ancient magic. "You offer me terms of surrender," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I offer you something far more valuable, redemption. Renounce the Shadow Court's influence, return to the pure essence of your wolf nature, and I will welcome you as subjects rather than enemies." Pretty words, Victoria snarled, but her followers were backing away from Seraphina's approaching radiance. "But words won't save you when shadow consumes light." She raised her hands, and darkness poured from her fingers, not the natural shadows of night, but the hungry void of the Shadow Court itself. The attack should have struck Seraphina down, should have extinguished her silver fire like a candle in a hurricane. Instead, it broke against her like water against stone. The crown of starlight blazed with the accumulated power of 47 queens, and Seraphina felt their strength flowing through her. Not just her grandmother's might, but the wisdom of Morwen the Wise, the justice of Isadora the Just, the courage of every ruler who had stood against the darkness before her. "You mistake me for my grandmother," Seraphina said, her voice echoing with the authority of 1,000 years. She faced the Shadow Court alone, without understanding the true nature of the threat they represented. "But I have learned from her sacrifice, learned from the trials, learned from the love that grounds me to who I truly am." She looked back at Kale, who stood ready to fight at her side, his silver eyes blazing with pride and determination. Then she glanced at Lyanna, whose fierce grin promised that the Drakmoor bloodline had produced more than one potential queen. Finally, her gaze settled on Magnus, whose unwavering loyalty represented the best of what werewolf society could be. "I don't stand alone," she declared, turning back to face Victoria and her corrupted followers. "I stand with my pack, my family, my people. And against that unity, Your shadow magic is nothing but mist before the dawn. The silver light erupting from her crown intensified, washing over the courtyard like a cleansing tide. Where it touched Victoria's followers, their corruption burned away, leaving them gasping and confused, but free of the Shadow Court's influence. But Victoria herself resisted, her will too strong, and her corruption too deep for easy cleansing. "This isn't over," she hissed, her beautiful form beginning to waver as shadow magic fought to maintain its hold. "The Shadow Court has been patient for 800 years. We can be patient a little longer. But know this, false queen. Your light will dim, your resolve will weaken, and when it does, we will be waiting." With those words, she dissolved into mist and shadow, fleeing rather than face the full power of a crowned Drakmoor queen. Her followers, freed from her influence, knelt in the courtyard, their eyes clear for the first time in years. "The first battle is won," Lyanna observed, but her expression remained serious. But Victoria was right about one thing: this is far from over. Seraphina nodded, feeling the weight of the crown and the responsibility it represented. The Shadow Court had shown their hand, revealed the scope of their influence, and the depth of their corruption. But they had also shown their weakness. They could not stand against the united werewolf world, could not triumph over love and loyalty working in harmony. "Then we prepare for war," she said simply. "But we prepare as one people, united under the ancient laws and guided by the wisdom of our ancestors. The darkness may come for us again, but it will find us ready." As if in response to her words, howls echoed across the mountains, not the corrupted cries of shadow-touched wolves, but the pure voices of pack after pack responding to their queen's call. The true gathering was about to begin. Chapter 10: Bonds of Silver and Shadow. The great hall of Drakmoor Castle had been transformed into something that would have made Seraphina's ancestors proud. Long tables filled the space, where once only a throne had stood, and representatives from 11 loyal packs sat in heated discussion, their voices creating a cacophony of different accents and opinions. The crown of starlight pulsed gently on Seraphina's brow as she listened to the debates, its moonstones allowing her to sense the emotional undercurrents beneath each speaker's words. 6 more packs have responded to the Queen's call, reported Lyanna, who had taken on the role of chief scout with the enthusiasm of someone born for adventure. The Ironwood pack from the Canadian Rockies, the Mistral pack from the Pacific Coast, and 4 smaller family groups from the Eastern Territories. "But there's troubling news too." "Tell me," Seraphina said, though she could already sense the darkness in her cousin's report. 3 entire packs have gone silent. Not just refusing to answer the call, completely vanished. Their territories show signs of struggle, but no bodies, no blood. Just emptiness. Lyanna's usual confidence was shaken, her green eyes reflecting worry. "It's like they were simply erased." Magnus Silverclaw looked up from the ancient maps spread across a section of table. "Shadow magic," he said grimly. "I've seen it before, in the early days after your grandmother's fall. The Shadow Court doesn't always corrupt. Sometimes they simply consume, absorbing entire packs into their collective consciousness." "Can they be saved?" Seraphina asked, though part of her already feared the answer. "If we can find them before the process is complete," Kale replied from his position at her right hand. "But the longer they remain under shadow influence, the less of their original selves survive. Eventually, they become nothing more than extensions of the Shadow Court's will." The discussion was interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard outside. Through the great windows, Seraphina could see a lone figure approaching the castle, not walking, but crawling, leaving a trail of silver blood on the ancient stones. "Someone get a healer," she commanded, rising from her place at the head table. But even as the words left her lips, she was moving, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. The figure was a young werewolf, barely past his first transformation, his clothes torn and his body marked by wounds that reeked of shadow magic. But it wasn't his injuries that made Seraphina's breath catch. It was his scent. Beneath the corruption and pain, she smelled the wild forests of the Northern Territories, the clean snow of mountain peaks, the distinctive marker of a bloodline she recognized. "Thornfield Pack," she whispered, kneeling beside the wounded wolf as her healers rushed to tend his injuries. Your Majesty, the young werewolf gasped, his eyes struggling to focus on her face. I'm Jacob Thornfield. My pack, they came in the night. Shadows with silver eyes, speaking with voices that weren't their own. They took everyone. My parents, my siblings, the elders. I only escaped because... He coughed, silver blood spilling from his lips. Because I was out on night patrol when they struck. Who took them? Seraphina asked gently, though she already suspected the answer. The consortium, Jacob whispered. But not just Victoria's followers. There were others, beings that weren't quite werewolf anymore. They moved like shadows given form and their leader. He shuddered, his young face pale with remembered terror. Their leader had your grandmother's face. The words hit Seraphina like a physical blow. Around the courtyard, she heard the sharp intake of breath from the assembled pack leaders, felt the surge of fear and disbelief that rippled through the crowd. That's impossible, Magnus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Queen Lyralii died 800 years ago. I saw the records, the witness accounts. Death isn't always the end, a new voice said from the castle's entrance. All heads turned to see a figure that made Seraphina's royal instincts sing with recognition, an elderly woman with silver hair braided with moonstone beads, her eyes holding the wisdom of ages. She walked with the aid of a staff carved from ancient oak, but power radiated from her like heat from a forge. Elder Moonwhisper, Magnus breathed, dropping to one knee in automatic respect. I thought you had passed beyond the veil years ago. Not yet, old friend, the woman replied with a sad smile. Though I sometimes wonder if that wouldn't have been kinder. I am Sage Moonwhisper, keeper of the ancient lore, and I have spent the last 8 centuries studying the Shadow Court's true nature. What young Jacob saw was no hallucination. She approached Seraphina, her ancient eyes studying the crown of starlight with a mixture of pride and sorrow. The Shadow Court has been planning this moment since your grandmother's fall, Your Majesty. They didn't just corrupt her, they bound her soul to their service, kept her consciousness intact within their collective while her body moldered in the royal tomb. You're saying my grandmother is alive? Seraphina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alive is not the word I would use, Sage Moonwhisper replied carefully. Her essence exists, twisted by 8 centuries of shadow influence, shaped into something that serves their will while retaining enough of her original memories to be truly dangerous. She knows every secret of House Drakmoor, every weakness in our defenses, every ritual and tradition that might be used against us. The implications were staggering. Seraphina felt the weight of the crown pressing down on her as she realized the true scope of what they faced. Not just corrupted werewolves or shadow magic, but her own ancestor turned against her. A queen who had once been beloved, now serving as the ultimate weapon against her own bloodline. What do they want? She asked, though she suspected she already knew. You, the sage said simply. Not to kill, not to corrupt, but to replace. The Shadow Court learned from their mistake with Lyralii. They pushed her too hard, too fast, and she became unstable, uncontrollable. With you, they plan to be more subtle. They'll use your grandmother's appearance, her memories, her voice to manipulate you. They'll offer you seemingly reasonable compromises, ways to save your people that require only small surrenders of principle. And if I refuse? Then they'll show you the faces of every werewolf they've consumed, every pack they've absorbed. They'll force you to choose between your ideals and the lives of innocents. The sage's expression was grim. It's a trap 8 centuries in the making, designed specifically to break a Drakmoor queen who possesses both power and compassion. Seraphina stood slowly, feeling the assembled pack leaders' eyes on her as she processed this revelation. The crown's moonstones pulsed with silver light, responding to her emotional turmoil, but beneath the fear and uncertainty, she felt something else: resolve. Let them come, she said, her voice carrying across the courtyard with ringing authority. Let them bring my grandmother's corrupted shade. Let them offer their poison bargains. Let them threaten everyone I hold dear. I have something they didn't count on when they made their plans 8 centuries ago. What's that? Lyanna asked, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon. Seraphina looked around at the faces surrounding her. Magnus with his unwavering loyalty, Lyanna with her fierce courage, the assembled pack leaders who had answered her call despite the danger, and most importantly, Chaol, whose silver eyes blazed with love and determination. "I'm not alone," she said simply. My grandmother faced the Shadow Court as a solitary ruler, convinced that she had to bear all burdens alone. But I have something she never allowed herself. True partners, real allies, people who stand beside me not because of the crown I wear, but because of who I am beneath it. She turned to Chaol, reaching for his hand. The trials tested whether I could resist corruption, whether I could make hard choices, whether I could prove my worth to rule. But they also showed me something else, that love isn't a weakness to be guarded against, but a strength to be embraced. The Guardian's bond, Sage Moonwhisper breathed, understanding dawning in her ancient eyes. Not just the duty bond that connects protector to charge, but the deeper magic that links soul to soul. If you can forge that connection properly, if you can balance the power of the crown with the strength of true partnership, we become something new, Seraphina finished. Not just queen and guardian, but partners in every sense. The Shadow Court planned for a lone ruler. They didn't plan for a bonded pair whose strengths complement each other. Chaol's hand tightened around hers, and she felt the first stirrings of something deeper than love, stronger than duty. The ritual is dangerous, he warned. If it fails, if our souls aren't truly compatible, it could destroy us both. Then we'd better make sure we're compatible, Seraphina said with a smile that held no trace of doubt. Because, ready or not, the Shadow Court is coming. And when they arrive with my grandmother's face and 8 centuries of accumulated darkness, they're going to find out what happens when they threaten a truly bonded pair. The moon was rising over the mountains, full and silver and perfect for the ritual that would either forge an unbreakable alliance or destroy them both. But as Seraphina looked into Chaol's eyes, she felt no fear, only the certainty that some bonds were worth any risk, some love strong enough to face any darkness. The true test of House Drakmoor was about to begin. Chapter 11. The Binding of Souls. The ritual chamber lay deep beneath Drakmoor Castle, carved from living rock and untouched by time or corruption. Ancient symbols covered every surface, glowing faintly with silver light that responded to Seraphina's presence. At the chamber's heart stood a circular dais marked with 2 interlocking crescents, one for the ruler, one for the guardian, both surrounded by runes that told the story of every successful bonding in the dynasty's 1,000-year history. 47 queens, 47 guardians, Sage Moonwhisper explained as she prepared the ritual components. But only 7 pairs ever achieved the true binding, the soul-deep connection that makes 2 into 1 while keeping their individual strengths intact. It's the rarest of all werewolf magics, and the most dangerous. Seraphina stood at the edge of the dais, the crown of starlight heavy on her brow, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. Through the castle stones, she could sense the approach of darkness, Victoria's forces massing in the valley below, shadow-touched creatures moving through the forest, and somewhere among them, the corrupted essence of her grandmother preparing for a confrontation 800 years in the making. "How much time do we have?" she asked. "Until midnight," Chaol replied, his silver eyes reflecting the chamber's mystical light. "The Shadow Court draws power from the dark of the moon, but they'll want to strike before dawn weakens them. That gives us perhaps 3 hours to complete the bonding. Or die trying," Lyanna added grimly from her position by the chamber's entrance. She had insisted on standing guard despite the ritual's private nature, her fierce protectiveness extending to both queen and guardian. The scouts report at least 200 shadow-touched werewolves surrounding the castle, plus things that don't have names in any language I know. Sage Moonwhisper finished her preparations and turned to face the pair who would attempt what so few had achieved. The ritual requires absolute trust, complete honesty, and the willingness to let another soul see you as you truly are, not the masks we wear for the world, but the deepest essence of who you are beneath all pretense. Many have failed not from lack of love, but from fear of being truly known. What happens if we fail? Seraphina asked. Your souls could be torn apart by the conflicting energies, the sage replied honestly. Or worse, you could be bound but improperly, creating a connection that drives you both to madness. The true binding isn't just about love, Your Majesty. It's about fundamental compatibility at the deepest level of existence. Kale stepped onto the dais beside her, his hand finding hers with the natural ease of perfect partnership. We're compatible, he said with quiet conviction. I've felt it since the moment we met, the way our strengths complement each other, the way our weaknesses balance out. This isn't just about the crown or the dynasty. This is about us. Seraphina looked into his silver eyes and saw her own certainty reflected there. They had faced trials separately and together, had been tested by shadow and light alike. Whatever the ritual revealed, whatever truths it demanded they share, she was ready.
Begin, she commanded.
Sage Moonwhisper began to chant in the old language, her voice weaving through syllables that predated human civilization. The symbols on the chamber walls blazed brighter, and power began to gather around the dais, like a living thing. But this wasn't the cold force of duty or the hungry energy of corruption. This was something warmer, deeper, more fundamental. Speak your truths, the sage commanded. Let the magic know who you truly are. Seraphina felt the compulsion take hold, words rising from depths she rarely allowed herself to explore. I am Seraphina Blackthorn, last daughter of House Drakmoor, heir to 47 queens and carrier of their accumulated wisdom. But beneath the crown, beneath the power, I am a woman who spent 25 years believing herself ordinary, who still sometimes feels like she's playing dress-up in her ancestors' clothes. The admission should have weakened her, should have diminished her royal authority. Instead, she felt lighter, as if acknowledging her uncertainties had somehow made her stronger. Kale's voice joined hers, equally raw with honesty. I am Kale Nightwood, Alpha of the Northern Pack, guardian sworn to protect the Drakmoor line. But beneath the oaths and the duty, I am a man haunted by his ancestors' choice, terrified that love might once again lead to betrayal, that I might be forced to choose between my heart and my honor. The power around them intensified, silver light beginning to flow between their joined hands. But with the magic came something else, images, memories, emotions that belonged to the other. Seraphina felt herself experiencing Kale's childhood, the weight of ancestral guilt that had shaped his every choice, the lonely years of preparing for a duty he both craved and feared. She felt his wonder when he first sensed her awakening power, his awe at her strength during the trials, his terror when she faced the shadow court alone. In return, she shared her own memories, the loneliness of growing up different, the confusion of discovering her true heritage, the overwhelming responsibility of accepting a crown she'd never expected to wear. She let him feel her fears about leadership, her uncertainty about whether she was truly worthy of the trust her people placed in her. But beneath the fears and doubts, something else flowed between them, deeper truths that even they hadn't fully acknowledged. I love your strength, Kale whispered, his voice barely audible above the rising power. But I also love your vulnerability, the way you question yourself even as you make decisions that will shape the world. You're not just a queen to me. You're the woman who makes me want to be worthy of standing beside her. I love your honor, Seraphina replied, tears streaming down her face as she felt the depth of his devotion through their growing connection. But I also love your humanity, the way you carry your ancestors' mistakes without letting them define you. You're not just my guardian. You're the man who makes me want to be worthy of your protection. The magic reached a crescendo, silver light exploding outward from their joined hands to fill the chamber with radiance that rivaled the sun itself. For a moment, Seraphina felt their individual selves dissolving, becoming part of something larger and more complete than either could be alone. Then the light settled, and they were still themselves, but changed. She could feel Kale's presence in her mind like a warm embrace, sense his emotions as clearly as her own. Through their bond, his strength flowed into her, while her wisdom touched his soul with silver fire. The true binding is complete, Sage Moonwhisper breathed, wonder thick in her ancient voice. You are still queen and guardian, still individuals with your own paths to walk. But you are also something more, a bonded pair whose combined strength exceeds the sum of its parts. Before anyone could respond to this miracle, the chamber shook with the force of an explosion from somewhere high above. Dust rained from the ceiling, and through the castle stones, Seraphina felt the approach of malevolent power that made her mark burn with warning. "They're here," Lina reported, her voice tight with battle readiness. "The assault has begun." But Seraphina felt no fear as she rose from the dais, Kale's hand still clasped in hers. Through their bond, she could sense his tactical awareness joining with her royal authority, his combat experience merging with her mystical power. They were no longer just two people facing an impossible enemy. They were a unified force that had never existed before in the werewolf world. "Let them come," she said, her voice carrying the authority of a true queen supported by perfect partnership. "We are ready." Above them, the castle trembled under assault, and in the darkness beyond its walls, an army of shadows prepared to test whether love could truly triumph over the accumulated darkness of 8 centuries. The final battle for the soul of House Drakmoor was about to begin. Through their bond, Seraphina felt Kale's wolf rising to meet the challenge, while he sensed the ancient power of her bloodline awakening to its full potential. Together, they climbed toward the battle that would determine the fate of every werewolf alive. 2 souls bound as one, ready to face whatever darkness awaited them in the halls of their ancestors. Chapter 12. The Queen's Justice. The Great Hall of Drakmoor Castle had become a battleground where past and present collided in a storm of silver light and writhing shadow. Through the shattered windows, werewolves in their hybrid forms clashed with creatures that defied description, beings of living darkness that had once been proud packs, now twisted into extensions of the Shadow Court's malevolent will. Seraphina stood at the heart of the chaos, the crown of starlight blazing like a captured star as she wielded power that flowed not just from her own bloodline, but through the perfect bond she shared with Kale. At her side, her guardian moved with preternatural grace, his silver blade cutting through shadow spawn while his tactical awareness guided their allies through the supernatural storm. "The main force is falling back," Lina reported, appearing at Seraphina's elbow with blood on her claws and fierce joy in her green eyes. "Your light is burning away their corruption faster than they can maintain it." But even as she spoke, the temperature in the hall plummeted, and a new presence entered the battle, one that made every werewolf present freeze with instinctive terror. The shadows at the hall's far end deepened and coalesced, taking the form of a woman who had been dead for 800 years, but whose beauty remained unmarred by time or corruption. Queen Heir Drakmoor stood before them, but this was not the gentle spirit who had guided Seraphina through the trials. This version blazed with shadow fire, her once kind eyes now pits of hungry darkness, her silver crown replaced by one forged from crystallized shadow. She moved with the fluid grace of absolute power, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of a ruler who had never learned to yield. "My dear granddaughter," the corrupted queen said, her tone filled with false warmth that made Seraphina's skin crawl. "How you've grown! How beautifully you wear our family's crown. But you wear it in service to outdated ideals, fighting for a world that no longer needs or wants your protection." "Grandmother," Seraphina replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her heart. Through her bond with Kale, she felt his strength supporting her, his love anchoring her to who she was beneath the weight of inherited tragedy. "You're not her anymore. You're just a weapon shaped by the Shadow Court to break my resolve." The Shadow Queen laughed, and the sound was like silver bells filled with poison. "I am more myself than I ever was in life, child. Death and shadow have burned away the weaknesses that held me back, compassion, doubt, the foolish belief that I owed service to creatures too weak to claim their own power." Around the hall, the battle had paused as both sides watched this confrontation between past and present, corruption and purity. The assembled pack leaders looked to their new queen with hope and fear in equal measure, while Victoria's remaining forces rallied behind their ultimate weapon. "You could join me," Heir continued, moving closer with predatory grace. Think of what we could accomplish together, grandmother and granddaughter, past and future united in purpose. We could reshape the werewolf world, eliminate the weakness that has kept our kind hiding in shadows for millennia. At what cost? Seraphina demanded. I've seen your vision, grandmother. I've felt the shadows' whispers. You would turn us into monsters to make us strong, sacrifice our souls to claim dominion over a world that would be ash and horror by the time we finished conquering it. Small prices for ultimate victory, the Shadow Queen replied. Tell me, child, how many of your precious subjects will die tonight because you lack the strength to end this conflict quickly? How many loyal werewolves will fall because you cling to ideals that serve no one but your own conscience? The words hit like physical blows, because beneath the corruption lay a terrible truth. Every moment Seraphina hesitated, every shadow-touched creature she tried to cleanse rather than destroy, more of her people suffered. Through the castle stones, she could feel the pain of wounded allies, the terror of cubs caught in a battle they didn't understand. Choose, Lyralii commanded, shadow fire blazing around her like a crown of darkness. Accept my power and end this battle now, or watch everything you claim to protect burn while you hold fast to principles that serve only the weak. For a heartbeat, Seraphina felt the temptation, not for the power itself, but for the simplicity it promised. No more impossible choices, no more balancing competing needs, no more watching people she cared about suffer while she tried to find perfect solutions to imperfect problems. But then she felt Kale's presence through their bond, his unwavering faith in her goodness, his certainty that she would find a third path that her corrupted grandmother couldn't even imagine. Through his eyes, she saw herself not as a weak ruler clinging to outdated ideals, but as something new, a queen who derived strength from compassion, who found power in connection rather than dominion. You're right, Seraphina said, and for a moment hope flared in her grandmother's shadow-touched eyes. I do lack the strength to end this quickly through force alone. But you've made the same mistake the Shadow Court always makes. You assume that power must be taken, that strength must be seized. She stepped forward, silver light blazing from the crown of starlight, but this wasn't the harsh radiance of battle. This was something warmer, more complex, the light of a queen who had learned to balance justice with mercy, strength with wisdom. I choose a different path, she continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Not the weakness of surrender, not the brutality of domination, but the strength that comes from willing service, from bonds freely given rather than chains forcibly forged. She raised her hand, and power flowed from her, not to destroy, but to heal. Silver light washed over the corrupted creatures in the hall, burning away the shadow taint that had twisted them into monsters. But unlike her earlier efforts, this cleansing came with something more, an offer of belonging, a place in the pack she was building, a chance to be part of something greater than their individual hungers. One by one, the shadow-touched werewolves fell to their knees, not in defeat, but in recognition. The darkness that had consumed their souls cracked and fell away like broken chains, revealing the wolves they had been before corruption claimed them. They looked up at their new queen with wonder and desperate gratitude, seeing in her not a conqueror, but a liberator. Impossible, Lyralii whispered, her shadow crown flickering as doubt crept into her voice for the first time. They were bound to the Shadow Court's will. Their souls were consumed, their wills subsumed. The Shadow Court told you that to make you despair, Seraphina replied gently. But souls aren't so easily destroyed, grandmother. They can be buried, suppressed, corrupted, but at their core, they remain what they always were. You just have to be willing to look past the darkness to find the light that still burns within. She moved closer to her grandmother's shade, feeling Kale's protective instincts through their bond, but also his trust in her judgment. Around them, the freed werewolves watched with bated breath as past and future faced each other in the light of silver fire. It's not too late, Seraphina said softly. Even for you. 800 years of shadow can't completely erase what you were, a queen who loved her people, who wanted to protect them from a world that didn't understand them. That love is still there, buried beneath layers of corruption and pain. Let me help you find it again. For a moment, something flickered in Lyreliai's shadow-touched eyes, a glimmer of the woman she had been, the grandmother who had guided Seraphina through the trials with wisdom and love. The shadow crown wavered, cracks appearing in its crystalline surface. But then Victoria's voice cut through the moment, like a blade. Don't listen to her lies, the consortium leader snarled, her own corruption blazing as she fought to maintain her hold on her ultimate weapon. She offers you weakness disguised as strength, chains disguised as freedom. The shadow crown solidified, and Lyreliai's expression hardened once more. The child speaks pretty words, she said, her voice filled with renewed venom. But words cannot change what is. I am Shadow now, and Shadow is all I will ever be. Then I'm sorry, Seraphina said, tears streaming down her face as she raised her hand one final time. But I won't let you hurt anyone else in service to that darkness. The power that flowed from her now was different, not the cleansing light she had used on the others, but something more complex and infinitely more difficult. This was the justice of a true queen, the terrible mercy that sometimes required destruction to prevent greater suffering. Silver fire engulfed the Shadow Queen, but instead of burning her away, it revealed her as she truly was, not a corrupted monster, but a tortured soul trapped in 8 centuries of darkness. For just a moment, Lyreliai appeared as she had been in life, her eyes clear and filled with love for the granddaughter she helped guide to the throne. Thank you, she whispered, her voice finally free of Shadow's taint. My dear child, you have become everything I hoped and more. Rule well, love freely, and remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to let go. With those words, she dissolved into motes of silver light that rose toward the ceiling and vanished, finally free of the Shadow Court's hold. Victoria screamed in rage and despair, her ultimate weapon destroyed not by force, but by the very compassion she had dismissed as weakness. The battle was over. Around the hall, werewolves knelt before their queen, not just her original allies, but the freed souls who had chosen loyalty over corruption, hope over despair. Through her bond with Kale, Seraphina felt his pride and love, his certainty that she had found the perfect balance between strength and mercy. The shadow cord is broken, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the castle and beyond. Their corruption is ended, their hold over our people severed. But we will not celebrate with vengeance or gloating. Instead, we will build a new werewolf world based on willing loyalty rather than forced submission, on strength that protects rather than dominates. She looked out at the assembled wolves, seeing not subjects but partners in the great work ahead. The crown of starlight pulsed with gentle light on her brow, but the true source of her authority came from the bonds she had forged with Kale, with her people, with the ideals she had chosen to serve. House Drakmoor had risen from 8 centuries of shadow, not through conquest, but through compassion, not through fear, but through love. And as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the castle walls with golden light, Seraphina knew that this was not an ending but a beginning. The last daughter had become the first queen of a new age, and the werewolf world would never be the same. The dawn of a new dynasty. 6 months after the Battle of Drakmoor Castle, the great hall hummed with a different kind of energy. Pack leaders from across the continent had gathered for the first Grand Council in 800 years, their voices raised not in conflict, but in collaboration as they worked to rebuild their fractured world. Seraphina sat on the ancient throne, the crown of starlight resting lightly on her brow, but her authority came not from the symbols of power, but from the trust she had earned. At her side, Kale served not just as guardian, but as her equal partner in leadership, their bond having become a model for other werewolf couples seeking to balance love and duty. The new accords are almost complete, Lina reported, looking up from the documents spread across the council table. As Seraphina's appointed ambassador to the Western Territories, she had proven as skilled at diplomacy as she was at combat. 17 packs have formally renewed their allegiance, and 12 others have requested membership in the new alliance. And the former shadow touched? Seraphina asked. Adapting well, Magnus replied with satisfaction. The rehabilitation programs are working. Most have been successfully reintegrated into their original packs, and those who can't return home have found new families among the allied territories. Through the great windows, Seraphina could see the signs of renewal everywhere. The castle's gardens blooming with flowers that hadn't grown there for centuries, new construction rising where old walls had crumbled, young werewolves training in the courtyards without fear of discovery or persecution. But the most important change couldn't be seen. It could only be felt in the way her people moved, spoke, and lived. Fear had been replaced by hope, suspicion by trust, isolation by community. The werewolf world was healing one bond at a time. "Your Majesty," a young voice called from the hall's entrance. Jacob Thornfield approached the throne, no longer the wounded refugee who had crawled to their gates, but a confident young man who served as liaison to the recovered packs. "There's someone here to see you. Someone who says she has information about the remaining Shadow Court strongholds." Seraphina exchanged glances with Kale, feeling his curiosity through their bond. "Send her in." The woman who entered was tall and elegant, with silver hair that caught the light like spun moonbeams. But it was her eyes that marked her as something special. They held depths that spoke of power carefully controlled, wisdom hard-won through centuries of experience. "Your Majesty," the woman said, offering a bow that was respectful but not subservient. "I am Elena Stormwind, former speaker for the Shadow Court's Inner Circle. I come to offer my knowledge and service to your new order." The announcement sent ripples of tension through the assembled council, hands moving to weapons, protective instincts flaring. But Seraphina raised her hand for calm, studying the newcomer with eyes that had learned to see past surface appearances to the truth beneath. "You're not corrupted," she observed. "The shadow taint is gone from you completely."
How?
Elena smiled, and in that expression Seraphina saw both regret and hope. "Because I never truly served the Shadow Court, Your Majesty. I was a spy, placed within their ranks 800 years ago by a queen who suspected their true nature. I have spent centuries gathering intelligence, waiting for the day when a Drakmoor heir would rise who is strong enough to hear the truth without being destroyed by it." "And what truth is that?" Kale asked, his guardian instincts on high alert. "That the Shadow Court was never the real enemy," Elena replied. "They were symptoms of a deeper disease, agents of something far older and more dangerous than mere corruption. The true threat still exists, sleeping in the deep places of the world, waiting for the right moment to awaken and reclaim what it considers its rightful dominion over both human and werewolf alike." Seraphina felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Through her bond with Kale, she sensed his understanding. This was not the end of their story, but merely the conclusion of its first chapter. "Then we'll face it," she said simply, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of a queen who had learned to trust in the strength of her bonds rather than the might of her power alone. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. All of us, united by choice rather than conquered by force." She looked around the great hall at the faces of her allies, Lyanna with her fierce loyalty, Magnus with his steady wisdom, the recovered shadow-touched werewolves who had found new purpose in willing service, and most importantly, Kale, whose love and strength flowed through their bond like an eternal flame. The last daughter of Drakmoor had become the first queen of a new age, but more than that, she had become something the werewolf world had never seen before, a ruler who derived power from connection rather than dominion, who found strength in unity rather than conquest. Whatever darkness might rise to challenge them in the days to come, they would meet it not as subjects following a distant monarch, but as a family bound by love, loyalty, and the unshakable belief that together they could overcome any shadow that dared to threaten the light they had built. The crown of starlight caught the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, its moonstones blazing with silver fire that promised hope for the future. And in that light, Seraphina saw not just the restoration of an ancient dynasty, but the birth of something entirely new, a kingdom built on the revolutionary idea that true strength came not from the power to command, but from the wisdom to serve. House Drakmoor had risen. The werewolf world was reborn. And the greatest adventures were yet to come. Some legacies sleep for centuries. waiting for love to awaken them. Others are born in the fire of that awakening, forged by hearts brave enough to choose connection over control, unity over dominion, hope over fear. The Crimson Crown legacy was both an ancient dynasty restored and a new world born, ruled by a queen who understood that the greatest power was the strength to serve, the greatest courage was the willingness to trust, and the greatest magic was love freely given and willingly received.
The end.